Hello everybody, my name is Jun Company and here is a seafood restaurant near Bondi Beach, Sydney. Sydney has few good upsides like very iconic landmark, beautiful beaches, good air quality like that. But also the city has some downsides too. In this video, I will tell you the pros and cons of Sydney travel. Yes, it's time to discover this marine Australian city. And one more, simple subscribe and like button. Gonna make this video more interesting. Yeah, let's go. City's landmarks are usually scattered. Shibuya Scramble, Tokyo Tower, and Sensoji of Asakusa are far from each other. In New York, the Empire State Building and Times Square are close together, but there's no connection between them. But Sydney's landmarks are clustered in the harbor north of the city. The Opera House, the Harbour Bridge are in one area, and there is a huge synergy between them. That's why I never get tired of exploring the harbor. Here's view of the Opera House in front of the Harbour Bridge, and the other way around, the Opera House under the Harbour Bridge. There is the view from above looking down the Harbour Bridge to North Sydney, and then there is a view from below the Opera House that looks both ways. I love the presence of the harbor and the feeling it gives me. I would say it's the best part of traveling to Sydney. Sydney has a temperature-humid climate, which is similar to Tokyo, Taipei, Washington DC, but Sydney has a lot of sunny days compared to these cities. Tokyo and Taipei, for example, they get long rainy seasons and typhoons throughout the summer and fall. Shibuya Sky, a must-do when traveling to Tokyo, is so popular that you have to make reservation long in advance. But there are many times when the observatory is closed due to cloudy and rainy weather. Of course, rainy Tokyo is charming, but the important thing is that the warm and humid climate usually means cloudy and rainy days. But look at Sydney, there's over a 50% chance of sunshine all year around. Precipitation is also consistent with some dry and wet seasons. The temperature is also attractive. It doesn't get too cold in winter. Tokyo and Taipei both have horrible heat in the summer. Sydney is hot, but not that hot. It's surprisingly cool in the morning and evening. And because of the location, it doesn't get typhoons. Weather is a big part of travel satisfaction and comfort. Sydney is among the best in the world in this regard. Of course, no one decides to travel to Sydney because of the weather, but people who come to Sydney are usually very satisfied with the weather. There are also many places in Sydney that take advantage of the clear skies. Even the ordinary building forest has a different feeling when the sky is clear. Park with green grass and the ocean shining blue. It's a great synergy with a really clear sky. And Sydney is one of the best in the world at this. A lot of Anglo-American cities have a higher percentage of green space than cities in other parts of the world. You've got Hyde Park and the Royal Botanic Garden right next to the city's forest of buildings. Moore Park and Centennial Park, which are huge in the south. Sydney has the plus along, accessible coastline. The coastline isn't just ocean, it's a cliff and beaches. There's actually uncountable beaches in Sydney. Sydneysiders living in such a nice neighborhood are cool. I guess that's Australia in general. Big land, lots of natural resources, no hostile countries around. It's a complete opposite of East Asia. And the income is high, the working hours are short. Sydney has a lot of natural beauty too. So people are more laid back. They laugh a lot, they make small talk. It's like West American. So when you're walking around Sydney, you will think, oh, people are cool in here. American public transport system is normally miserable, but the rest of Anglo-American country has pretty good public transportation. The tube in London is very old, but it goes everywhere in London. Toronto and Vancouver, Canada, have decent public transportation for North America, but Sydney has a better public system than them. And it's clean, it is important. I mean, you can't compare it to East Asia, which is the best in the world, but compared to London, Sydney's metro hygiene is heavenly. And the prices aren't expensive either. It starts at around 2.5 Australian dollar one way between the city centers. There's also a good network of bus, light rail, and ferry. Even Manly, which seems quite far from the city, is only a 20-minute ferry ride away. At last in Sydney, you will not say, "Oh, how do I get there?" We've talked about the harbour, the beaches, and the parks, but that's not all there is to Sydney. Of course, the metropolis has just few hills, but about 80 kilometers to the west, in the Blue Mountains, you will find some fantastic mountain scenery. It's easy to get to by public transportation too. You can hop on the hourly Blue Mountains line. And there's an added benefit of Blue Mountains too. In most mountain destinations, the purpose is going to the top of the mountain. But Katoomba area of Blue Mountain is already on the plateau, at 1,100 meters above sea level. And there's a valley around here, and you get to explore there. Cliff, waterfall, interesting shaped rocks, kind of that. So you don't have to worry about climbing. Other than that, there are other mountains nearby, such as Royal National Park in the south and Ku-ring-gai in the north. Of course, Blue Mountains is the most popular destination. Sydney is known as one of the most expensive cities in the world for real estate. That's not a lie, but its accommodations are not very expensive. The cheapest hostels in the city start from $25. If you find similar rooms in London, Paris, and New York, London and Paris are double of Sydney, and New York is double that again. America is crazy. Same goes for hotels. Even in the city, you can find $80 budget hotel. A hotel in $80 is definitely not out of question for short-term travel. Luxury and premium hotels are similar. The Four Seasons Sydney, which is a bit old but has a great harbor view, is in the $300. The Four Seasons in London or Paris over $2,000. Hong Kong is double the price of Sydney too. So if you calculate the amount of money you've spent on your trip, it's definitely cheaper than the same itinerary in the US or Europe. In Europe and the US, there are many neighborhoods that are not very safe. This is not to say that kidnappings, robberies, and murders are as common as in South America or Africa, but there are plenty of petty crimes that gonna ruin your travel. Pickpockets in Italy have been infamous. Other major destinations in Western and Southern Europe, like Paris, London, and Barcelona, are not immune too. American destinations have less pickpocketing, but more car theft. But Australia is immune from those. It is so far away from the rest of the continent, so it is hard for illegals to get here. Plus, it is a high-income country with rich natural resources and low population. So, it doesn't have to deal with the underclass that much. And usually, in most countries, the bigger the city, the worse the security. In Australia, it's the other way around. Sydney is one of the top safe cities along with Melbourne. So you don't have to worry about pickpockets and mugging when traveling in Sydney. And the city is clean because it doesn't have a lot of similar insecurities. I think a lot of people are disappointed with that in European cities, like the smell of the urine and garbage on the streets, but Sydney is definitely a clean city. Of course, it's not as safe as East Asia, and especially not as clean as Japan, but it's a Western city, and I think that's a good thing. Australia is one of Anglo-American country. Every sign and script are only written as English, and everybody speak English. When you get to Thai or Vietnam, it's quite difficult to enjoy their local place. It is also hard to make a conversation with local people, but you don't worry about that in Sydney. You will not be confused with a strange menu. You can ask anything to local people. Of course, this could be a disadvantage for those who want to feel an exotic culture for themselves, but I think this is basically an advantage. So, Sydney is a charming maritime city, but there is no perfect destination in the world. Let's talk about the downsides of Sydney. Sydney is where the history of the Australian colonies begin, but it's only 1788 and is located in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean. So even this city has a beautiful skyline and landmarks, it doesn't have a distinct culture and history. It doesn't have major historically significant events too, and it doesn't have a lot of cultural heritage. It's just that the keywords to describe the cities are vague. Not to mention Paris, London, Rome, New York history is twice as long as Sydney, and it has been the center of the modern world. Istanbul, the bridge between East and West. Berlin, the symbol of the Cold War. But Sydney lacks the story of the city itself. It's hard to explain because it doesn't exist. Australia is the most isolated continent in the world, and Sydney is located in its southeast corner. So it's very far from anywhere in the world. 6,000 kilometers from Singapore, 7,500 from Tokyo, 12,000 from Los Angeles, 16,000 kilometers from London. Southeast Asia is the most closest region of Sydney, but Bangkok still requires more than 9 hours flight time. This distance itself is a huge hurdle to travel Sydney. You need more than a week to visit here. The inherent downsides of traveling in Australia, even in Sydney. The main attractions are spread out and not easily connected to each other. Cairns, the starting point of the Great Barrier Reef, is anchored to the northeast here. Gold Coast and Brisbane are at the east. Melbourne, another big city, is at the south. Perth, where you can see quokkas, is on the other side of the continent to the west. Uluru is in the center. It's all so far away from each other. Of course, it's not like there's nothing near Sydney. You can go to Newcastle and Port Stephens in the north, or Wollongong in the south. And within an hour and a half flight, you can get Melbourne, Brisbane, and Gold Coast. But these places are weak. They pale in comparison to the rest of the world. London and Paris are an hour away in Europe. And then you have Spain, Italy, and Germany, each with its own personality. You can have so many different experiences in one trip. Even in the US, you've got San Francisco, LA, Las Vegas in the west. And then you have the Grand Canyon and Yosemite National Park either. At the East Coast, there are New York, Boston, Niagara, and Washington DC. Let's get back to Australia, Sydney. The Blue Mountains are cool, but they're a baby compared to Grand Canyon. Australian culture is basically a derivative of British culture. Politically, economically, and culturally, the world is dominated by the Anglo-Americans, at least not when it comes to food. You know British food has a bad reputation. Australian local food is similar to UK and not as appealing. The most famous foods are pies, fish and chips, steaks and grills, and for dessert and snack, Tim Tam and Remington cake. They are not bad, sometimes they're usually better than the originals. Pies are good in England, so pass it. Fish and chips are tasty, the fish fillets are savory itself. In the UK, they don't season on the fish before frying. It's bad. Steaks is also awesome. This is Australia with numerous cows. But is this really worth the trip to Sydney to eat this? I think no, it's not. Have you seen any Australian restaurants overseas? Sydney is an international city, and there's a lot of food from other countries, especially Asia, but they also couldn't be a reason to travel Sydney. Food is a big part of the trip, but Sydney is bad at it in terms of the originality. Oh, except for coffee. Australians are crazy about coffee. Coffee manias will be happy just drinking coffees. Australia's GDP per capita is 65,000 US dollar, almost twice of Japan. So basically the cost of living is higher than almost countries in the world. In terms of accommodation and transportation, as I mentioned in the advantages, there are some things that are not very expensive, but the meals that you have to eat every day 2 or 3 times a day is quite expensive. Breakfast like this, 25 US dollar. Spaghetti with a glass of wine is almost 35 US dollar. A bowl of Vietnamese rice noodle, 18 US dollar. In Vietnam, it's only 2 US dollar. Pakapao, my favorite Thai food, is only 2 US dollar in Thailand, but 18 US dollar in Sydney. If you eat 3 meals a day outside, you can easily spend 100 US dollar on food. Of course, if you eat cheaply at the food court, you will end up in the 30 US dollar range, but it's shame to do that on the vacation. Normal zoo is for 40 US dollar, and the famous Harbour Bridge climbing is over 250 US dollar. I've already mentioned the advantages, cool vibes, gorgeous beaches and parks, but these are things that are harder to appreciate on the short-term trip. Picnics in the park are only as good as you live here. It is hard to fit in a day at the park when you're already busy. We are travelers. And surfing is something that a lot of locals do in Sydney, but if you're here for a city break, not a vacation, it's not easy. There aren't a lot of cheap equipment rental places like in Bali or other surfing destinations. In fact, supermarket prices are cheap, similar to other high-income countries. You can eat a $120 steak in a restaurant, but if you buy a beef in the supermarket or butcher shop and grill it, it's only $25. But then again, we are travelers and it's not easy to shop for cooking, especially when you're in a hotel that doesn't have a kitchen. Sure, sunny weather is a plus anywhere, but city trips are basically not ruined by cloudy weather. Of course, it's a shame if the view from observatory is ruined by raining and foggy, but rainy cities are charming too. Japanese cities are the example, when the signs and buildings are lit up. And in places like Paris and London, which have a more oceanic climate on the west coast, you will not be disappointed by their cloudy day, because that's the way it is. But Sydney is basically sunny, and is a city that has a lot of nature, including the harbor. So the impact of the lack of sunshine is unusually high. Let's look at a comparison group for a moment. And that doesn't mean that city is more desirable when it rains. It's not like there's a lot of cyanide. It would be great if the sky is clear for your entire trip to Sydney. You will have such lasting memories. You can't beat sunny Sydney anywhere in the world. But if you're so unlucky and only face cloudy Sydney in your trip, then you will say, wow, I flew 10 hours to see this. Yes, Sydney doesn't have a lot of downsides, but they are all kind of critical. So, let's summarize what we learned today, the pros and cons of traveling to Sydney. Yes, this is it. Now you know about the pros and cons of Sydney travel. Do you agree with my list? I just hope you enjoy upsides more and less disappointed about the downsides. This place where I finished this video is the Royal Botanic Garden near Opera House. Thank you for watching this long video and thank you again.